Good evening. When it comes to influential video games, there are a plethora of games to be considered. Mario 64, Grand Theft Auto 3, Minecraft. But with regards to first-person shooters, and especially when it comes to console shooters, no game is more influential in my opinion than Halo Combat Evolved. Combat Evolved is the perfect subtitle for the original Halo, as Halo CE changed the game when it comes to first-person shooters on console. While CE wasn't the first, as there were other first-person shooters on console that predated Combat Evolved, CE was one of the first FPS games on console that was actually tolerable to play and one that had a massive appeal. Today, we will take a second look at Halo Combat Evolved and why after nearly 25 years, Halo Combat Evolved is still, for the most part, a timeless masterpiece and one of the most influential video games of all time. So sit back, relax, grab your Mountain Dew and Doritos, and let's teabag and pocket reload our way straight into this. When looking back at Combat Evolved, the first thing that comes to mind is just how truly revolutionary CE was. Yes, first-person shooters were not new at the time of Combat Evolved's release, as the PC had its fair share of FPS games. Games such as Half-Life, Counter-Strike, Quake, and of course Doom, to name a few. However, console shooters were not as prominent at the time, and the PC was a definitive way to play first-person shooters during this era. A key factor as to why this has to do with controllers. Many video game developers during this period had a hard time figuring out how to adapt mouse and keyboard controls to a gamepad that lacked the same number of buttons and keys that you would find on a keyboard. It would be like trying to race the Daytona 500 with a lawnmower. However, this challenge didn't keep developers from making an honest effort. There were actually quite a few FPS games on consoles, from ports of PC titles to wholly original games made specifically for their respective consoles. Some examples include GoldenEye 64, Time Splitters, and the original Turok. And while these games are great in their own right, some of these titles had truly awful controls. As fun as GoldenEye was back in the day, playing it with an N64 controller today just feels odd and unnatural, as that controller was not made with real humans in mind. If you don't believe me, go back and try to play console shooters before Halo Combat Evolved, and you will definitely feel the growing pains that console shooters were going through. They're not impossible to play, but they definitely don't play as smooth as they could have, and this was one of the reasons why FPS games struggled to gain popularity on consoles. With this in mind, it's easy to see why Halo Combat Evolved's revolutionary control scheme changed the game. To get a better understanding of what I'm talking about, let's take a look at that control scheme. Halo Combat Evolved was quite different than other shooters on console, as the game was made specifically with the behemoth of a controller that the original Xbox came with. Same controller was named the Duke, and while it was not the prettiest to look at, it was most certainly pushed the needle for console shooters, as it featured a dual analog stick layout, which wasn't original as the PlayStation did it before a few years prior. However, the layout of the sticks and shape of the controller was a lot more comfortable to use for longer sessions. The game also played damn near flawlessly on the thing, as the developers behind Halo, Bungie, figured out how to make moving and aiming on a controller feel seamless. For instance, the left analog stick controlled movement, the right stick controlled aiming, which is a lot more accessible than only having one analog stick. Halo also felt seamless, as every action that the player needed to perform was quite easy to pull off. Want to throw a grenade? Press left trigger. Want to spray a grunt full of lead? Hold down right trigger. Want to punch your friend in the back while he's driving the Warthog? Press B and await the ensuing rage. The controls here were damn near flawless, and it's no wonder why, as nearly every console shooter that has followed since has copied Halo controls. Call of Duty, Battlefield, and even a more recent example of Fortnite have all taken inspiration from Halo Combat Evolved. Dual analog sticks weren't the only massive change with CE, as aiming was heavily improved with smoother aim assist and aim acceleration. These innovations are why Halo Combat Evolved has aged fairly gracefully on a control level. Moving away from controls, another reason why Halo Combat Evolved should be considered an influential masterpiece is the level design and sandbox. Before Combat Evolved, Bungie had previously worked on the Marathon series, which was another FPS franchise that, while quite similar to Doom with regards to level design, gave Bungie the experience needed to craft a new and improved console shooter. History lesson aside, the level design in Combat Evolved is so influential because it changed how a lot of FPS campaigns were structured from both a narrative perspective and a gameplay perspective. For instance, most FPS games at the time copied many of the game design principles from Doom, such as tight corridors, keycard scavenging, and pressing up against every single single wall possible in order to find the exit. Combat Evolved wasn't like this, as a vast majority of levels in Combat Evolved were wide and expansive, but weren't so large that you would get lost in them for hours. Examples include the second level of the game, aptly titled Halo. This level is big, but you will not have a hard time figuring out where to go as the level design directs you in the right direction. For example, there are bright blue lights near entrances and pathways to ensure that you don't get lost. Furthermore, the dialogue and on-screen prompts are quite helpful if you get turned around.
This cave is not a natural formation. Someone built it, so it must mean something.
While the levels are linear, most missions are large enough to feel like you're partaking on a massive journey. From missions where you drive vehicles across vast and breathtaking environments to close encounters in tight but interesting areas, the level design in Halo CE varies enough to never get boring on repeat playthroughs. However, the game is not perfect, as a few levels in the later half of the game get quite repetitive, such as the downright awful mission known as the Library or the fun but visually repetitive Assault on the Control Room. But in my opinion, the overall quality of the level design holds up throughout most of Halo Combat Evolved's campaign. Many developers would take inspiration from the level design principles that Bungie put out there. A lot of newer FPS titles are structured like CE. For example, COD 4 Modern Warfare starts off with a very linear level on a shipping container with the goal of getting players used to close quarters combat. Then it transitions to a mission where players fight across large battlefields in Europe. The difference in size between these two missions is quite similar to the beginning of Halo CE, as CE starts with a linear corridor shooter on the Pillar of Autumn, then opens up with the previously mentioned level that takes place on the Halo ring. To wrap this point up, without the influential level design that Halo Combat Evolved brought to the table, there is a world out there where a lot of your favorite video games would have been structured quite differently. Moving over to the sandbox side of things, there is no argument. CE's weapons, vehicle, and enemy sandbox is downright iconic, and for the most part has aged flawlessly. Let's take a look at the weapons. Pretty much all the weapons in Combat Evolved have another function than just killing enemies. The AR is great for stripping enemy shields and is the perfect weapon to mow down large groups of unshielded enemies like grunts or Flood. The Magnum on the other hand does fantastic damage in its own right, but is way more effective when it is paired with the assault rifle or the plasma pistol, as one can use the Magnum to finish off an enemy with a precise headshot after their shields have been stripped. The shotgun is of course great at close range. The plasma rifle is sort of like the AR but overheats instead of reloading. The Needler is a unique weapon that fires tracking rounds that eventually explode once they hit the enemy. The rocket launcher is of course a rocket launcher, and the sniper is a very satisfying weapon to use for precise kills. And lastly, the plasma pistol, which is a weapon that has the ability when charged to drain enemy shields in one shot. While Combat Evolved didn't have thousands of weapons like Borderlands 2 or customization options like the later Call of Duty titles, the weapon sandbox is all the player needs to have a good time in this game, as each weapon can be used in a variety of different scenarios and played differently according to which weapon you have equipped in your secondary slot. Since Combat Evolved had a 2-weapon limit, which was unheard of at the time as most PC shooters let the player carry their entire inventory on them at any given time, the player is forced to strategically decide on what 2 weapons they want to carry. And this limitation also forces the player to experiment with different combos, ensuring that no weapon goes ignored. This 2-weapon limit quickly became the standard for most first-person shooters going forward until the boomer shooter renaissance that we have been experiencing over the past few years. Now let's take a look at the enemies. From the cleverly designed Covenant to the unrelenting Flood Horde to the annoying but satisfying to destroy Forerunner Sentinels, CE's enemy design is fantastic, and fighting them never gets boring. The way that the enemies were designed and how they interacted with the player was truly groundbreaking at the time. This is due to the fantastic artificial intelligence that Bungie designed specifically with the player in mind. Most enemies in video games around that time had truly awful AI that felt like it was designed by chimpanzees. Most video game enemies before Halo just stood around aimlessly and waited on you to shoot them. This is not the case in Halo, as enemies in Halo are dynamic and react realistically to the player's actions. For instance, elites will dodge grenades, flank the player to get the upper hand, melee the player when in close range, and throw plasma grenades when the time is right. Grunts on the other hand flee when their commanding elite is killed, but will act aggressively when they massively outnumber the chief. Jackals usually stay planted with their plasma shield and will run when their shield is broken. And lastly, the Hunter is a massive enemy that will engage the player in melee combat when close, or fire a very dangerous cannon at range. The Hunter also has a shield on his arm that makes fighting the Hunter up close a fun dance. Speaking of dancing, this gameplay loop when fighting the Covenant is what I and many other Halo fans have titled the Covenant Dance. This stance is essential to why Halo's combat feels so rewarding and satisfying, and is why when both the weapon and enemy sandbox click, the game feels like a dance. And I know I'm not alone in this opinion. Ask plenty of Halo fans why they enjoyed Halo Combat Evolved so much, and they will tell you because of the combat with the Covenant. All in all, this combat system rocks, and is the 30 seconds of fun that was Bungie's moniker when developing Halo Combat Evolved. However, while I have gushed about the combat system, it is not perfect, as the Flood, in my honest opinion, have some massive issues. Now, while the Flood are perfectly designed from a story and visual perspective, they are not perfect on the gameplay side of things. For one, the Flood get very repetitive to fight due to their lack of dynamic AI. Most of the time, Floods simply charge the player and occasionally fire rockets. The Flood do use firearms, but they do not interact with the player as dynamically as the Covenant. Quite terrifying on a first playthrough, but that horror wears thin fast due to oversaturation. To wrap this section up, they aren't the worst video game enemies to fight, but they are just not as fun as the Covenant are, and they are overused in the latter half of the game. And lastly, we have the Forerunner Sentinels. These guys are fine to fight as they are just flying enemies. They can be harder on higher difficulties, but on normal they are fairly easy to kill, making them easy to fight but not very interesting. However, the best part of the Sentinel is how it interacts with enemies in the area, as these little buggers fight Flood and in turn give the player a wholly unique team fight scenario. These team fights aren't groundbreaking by today's standards, but at the time most enemies in first-person shooters rarely interacted with each other in meaningful ways. This small addition to FPS game design is just another example of how Halo Combat Evolved influenced the video game industry, as most modern FPS games have team fights between different enemy factions. Notable examples include AI team fights between bandits and Hyperion robots in Borderlands 2, General Shepard's PMC soldiers versus Makarov's Russians in Modern Warfare 2, and pirates versus the Rakyat Warriors in Far Cry 3. These three games, by the way, are absolutely fantastic and deserve a video of their own. So, if you've liked this video so far, I would greatly appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. Anyways, this small addition to FPS game design has had a very influential effect on FPS development going forward. Vehicles and equipment also play a major role in the gameplay sandbox of Halo Combat Evolved. Grenades have a massive impact on combat. Frag grenades were good at clearing out groups of grunts, killing off elites, stunning hunters, and damaging vehicles. Plasma grenades, on the other hand, stick to enemies and explode, and leave a very visible plasma trail. On the equipment side of things, we have the Overshield and Active Camouflage. Overshields give you additional health, while Active Camouflage turns the player invisible. These power-ups could change the tide of battle in both single player and multiplayer. And speaking of multiplayer, keep that in mind for later. And for the final piece of equipment, we have the shield recharge system and the med kits for restoring the player's health. The recharge system was something that not a lot of games at the time had, as most games used the standard lives and health kit system. This system ensured that the player was able to take cover and return their attack against the Covenant, feeling all-powerful while doing so. It was an innovative and ingenious design concept that kept the flow of gameplay fast and fluid, as the player is not constantly searching for help. Medkits still exist. However, they are simply a quick recovery tool that become a crutch on harder difficulties. They are not impossible to find, but they are not strewn everywhere on every other corner. Usually, the player must overcome a great challenge or go off the beaten path to find the medkits, which in turn leads the player to exploring and witnessing more of the world. While not all of these abilities and equipment were necessarily new at the time of Halo CE's release, their implementation within the game set the standard for power-ups and abilities for years to come. For instance, there are a plethora of video games that arrived after Halo that followed suit. COD, Battlefield, and Gears of War to name a few. All of these games primarily rely on a regenerative health system or have health packs to help quicken the regeneration. Now that we've examined the equipment of Halo Combat Evolved, let's take a look at its vehicles. The vehicles in CE are just as, if not more, iconic than the weapons. The Warthog, for instance, is a fantastic vehicle that was cleverly designed and rightfully deserves its name. Next up we have the Ghost. This Covenant land speeder is a fun addition to the sandbox, as the player just feels very fast flying this thing, as well as the dual cannons make this a very fun offensive option. Next up we have the Covenant Banshee, which is a vehicle that can be annoying to fight at times, but is really fun to get into and, fly around with. And lastly, we have the Scorpion tank, and as the old adage goes, tank beats everything. The Scorpion is a beast of a vehicle that can pretty much one-shot any other enemy in the game. The only problem with the Scorpion is, for some reason, whenever you get shot, the armor on the Scorpion doesn't really protect you much, and instead it takes the health away from your health instead of the tank health. But overall, the vehicles in Halo Combat Evolved are absolutely iconic and are one of the reasons why the gameplay in Combat Evolved feels so varied. Moving away from the nitty-gritty game development side of things, Halo is also iconic because of its soundtrack. I couldn't make a review over Halo without mentioning the absolutely revolutionary soundtrack led by Marty O'Donnell, one of the GOATs when it comes to songwriting, and someone who I actually got to speak with a few months back. The soundtrack featured here is absolutely phenomenal, as each track fits every moment perfectly. The main theme, for instance, is highly memorable, as the Gregorian chants feel truly out of this world, and gives Halo the bombastic sound that feels just right. Covenant Dance is also another beat that I listen to on repeat, as it's just so fluid and memorable. The Flood theme is another track that is a complete earworm, and ironically has stuck in my brain longer than some other more played tracks. Every song in this game is perfectly placed, and the feeling the music can give you is truly life-changing. On a personal level, the music of Halo has helped me face my depression and bipolar disorder, as the music here is just so familiar and relaxing. To put it short, Halo would not be nearly as good as it is without the music. Instead, music does a lot of heavy lifting in Halo Combat Evolved, as well as the franchise as a whole. The music is also perfect for making YouTube videos with, as you've probably noticed that the entire soundtrack of this video has been nothing but Halo bangers. Now that we've covered the music, it only makes sense to cover the cinematics that the music goes along with. The story cinematics in Halo were brilliant at the time, as most games around then just plop the player into an arena without much build-up or context, and while rushing into the action is not always a bad thing, having these cinematics really work wonders for the pacing of the game. By giving the player a break from the action, it ensures that the player will not get bored too quickly by the gameplay, and it tells a pretty engaging story to boot. The cinematics are also well crafted in nature, as shots are cinematically and aesthetically pleasing, and said cinematics make the game feel like a larger-than-life blockbuster. In short, these cinematics are downright awesome, and I love rewatching them on repeat playthroughs to catch things that I missed, or just to admire the cinematography. Now, what are good cinematics without a good story to go along with them? While the story in Halo Combat Evolved isn't the most complex sci-fi story out there, it is arguably the best introduction to the world of Halo, as the story here masterfully eases the player into the world without it feeling overwhelming. One way that Halo achieves this is through the game's use of mystery and environmental storytelling. For example, the campaign only shows what events that are immediate to the plot, and paces things out in a way so that the player will have plenty of questions to solve, such as, what is Halo? Who is Master Chief and Cortana? Who are the Covenant? And one of the biggest mysteries in the game, what happens to that Elite and Johnson at the end of the game? But in all seriousness, the inherent mystery and lack of direct answers in Halo's story leads to the player wanting more after the credits roll, which is a good thing. And while there are a few plot holes here and there, such as why can't Cortana just teleport Master Chief directly to the control room, or the exact size of the Pillar of Autumn, these plot holes don't take much away in the grand scheme of things. The characters in Halo are also masterfully written and acted by all those involved. Jennifer Taylor gives a fantastic performance as the guiding and warm AI companion of Cortana. Steve Downes delivers a cold and calculated performance as the Master Chief, as his voice is one of the reasons why Master Chief is so iconic in the first place, because without Steve Downes, there is no Master Chief. And lastly, the supporting cast of characters such as Captain Keyes and Sergeant Johnson are masterfully played by both Pete Stacker and David Scully respectively. We also have to mention the mischievous character of 343 Guilty Spark. Voiced by Tim Dabideau, 343 Guilty Spark is a very mysterious and slightly annoying character in Halo, who plays a major role in not only this game, but every other game in the trilogy. To conclude this section about story, Halo Combat Evolved tells a fantastic introduction to the world of Halo, and is able to do this through inherent mystery, environmental storytelling, and writing that is supported by a phenomenal cast. And this is a story best enjoyed with friends. And speaking of friends, the last major element of Combat Evolved that I wanted to cover in this video is that of couch co-op and multiplayer. In Combat Evolved, the player can play Halo in its entirety locally with friends, which was a godsend back then as the internet was relatively new. Playing Halo in this way was how myself and millions of others experienced Halo back in the day. The split screen functionality was also the basis for why Halo was so popular, as it was the perfect party game to play with friends. Being able to play the campaign with a buddy or playing competitively in local multiplayer were some of my favorite gaming memories growing up, and what a multiplayer that Halo Combat Evolved launched with. From game modes like Slayer to Capture the Flag, Halo's multiplayer was fast and frenetic, as the core gameplay principles from the campaign transferred over seamlessly directly into a multiplayer setting. Furthermore, since Halo allowed for 4-player split screen per console, players were able to connect up to 4 different Xboxes together via LAN to allow for 16-player multiplayer. These events were called LAN parties and were great for building a community. As much as I love the internet and how easy it is to play games with friends, a part of me misses that connection that playing games locally built, and the memories of these late night split screen matches will stay with me for a lifetime. To wrap this section up, split screen and multiplayer was a major element of Halo Combat Evolved, and there is no wonder as to why it was so revolutionary for its time. Well, that about wraps it up. In closing, Halo Combat Evolved was and still is an absolute banger, and should be considered as one of the most revolutionary and influential video games of its time. It was a system seller for the original Xbox, it was a waymaker for console shooters, it changed the game when it comes to FPS stories, and it was a major innovator with regards to co-op and multiplayer. All in all, Halo rightfully deserved its subtitle, Combat Evolved, as it changed the gaming landscape after its release and is still an influential masterpiece. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, as I plan on covering the rest of the Halo games in the future. This video was a lot of fun to make, as Halo Combat Evolved is one of my favorite video games and deserves its place in the Gaming Hall of Fame. But anyways, thank you for watching. This has been Mavo1111, and I will see you on the flip side.